found the 355 to be really remarkable and differentiated in how we can use it and the results that we're getting.
The absolute pandemic that we're really dealing with is diabetes, obesity. Sitting is the new smoking, and that's so true.
I've been telling companies for decades that we need to include those patients in some form or fashion in a study. And registry, you can treat all those lesion morphologies and clinical patients that you would otherwise not have included in clinical trials.
I ultimately gravitated to the 1.7. By the physics of it, it's probably the most powerful catheter they have. And then for tibial to 0.9. That's about it.
Our focus has changed from kind of looking at how something feels to what it kind of needs.
With some of the studies Dr. Ferraresi has done of the pathophysiology, we know that 3/3 of the distal tibials have a large degree of mediocalcinosis with neointimal hyperplasia.
Every major change from a professional standpoint in my life has led me to undertake new things that before I thought were not as great or not as useful. And then I come to realize that they're very useful.
We're using more atherectomy and OBLs and ACs, but we're also getting lower amputation rates.
Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.
The following podcast is not relating to my teachings and work at Del Cedar Medical Center and is for entertainment purposes only.
The AMBITION BTK study is sponsored by AngioDynamics. Visit AngioDynamics.com for product risk information.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Life of Flow podcast. And today we have Dr. John Rundback. You guys know him already. He's been a couple of times in the show. Interventional radiologist out of New Jersey, managing partner of New Jersey Endovascular and Amputation Prevention. And today we are talking about and geeking out about below the knee interventions, especially laser atherectomy and future trials in the area. So hope you guys enjoy. Vamos. Hello, everyone. Hey, John. Hey, Miguel.
Hey, guys.
How's everyone doing?
Good to see you guys.
Doing good, man. Finally getting some good weather down here in Houston. It's
I know,
beautiful.
it's nice and cool here.
Yeah, beautiful. Finally, we get a little break.
I definitely want to see Hope, and I hear Lucas is off, to spread his wings and, go to his own new place. So all very exciting. I got to come see the remarkable work you both are doing down there.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I'll see you in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Well, you better build something really cool so that we can go and visit you. That's for sure.
Yeah, I know. You're gonna be real supportive. This position.
Puerto Rico, Costa Rica. I'm liking this trip.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. So today we're gonna geek out a little bit about atherectomy and atherectomy below the knee. Anyone want to take us off?
Well, I'll start with just the fact that when we're taking care of below the knee disease and even so below the ankle disease, it's a different monster in many ways from some of the more proximal disease. We still see both, but as I've mentioned probably at some point in the past, when I was in Germany, I remember having these long aortoiliac cases and long femoral popliteal cases, and these were World War II patients that would smoke 3 packs a day. But the absolute pandemic that we're really dealing with is diabetes, obesity, right? Dr. Connolly said our last podcast, which I loved, was sitting is the new smoking, and that's so true. And it changes the distribution of disease, right? It's rare that you're going to find some iliac disease and some femoral disease in a patient with diabetes, but you certainly find diffuse disease, and the nature of the beast is diffuse. And unfortunately, when we look at some of the previous data, and I can mention one of my mentors, Andre Schmidt, he looked at a significant cohort of tibioperineal interventions, and not to his surprise, but certainly important to put out there, it was something like at 3 months, up to half of those were reoccluded, half of those had significant stenosis, and a third, and maybe a third were still working. And so we're looking at plain old balloon angioplasty as doable, but certainly an intervention that leads to a very limited patency rate. And we've had esoterical conversations of whether or not patency per se should be the ultimate goal in these cases, or should it be remission? And I know that that's maybe where we may go at some point in the conversation, But at the end of the day, if we're plumbers and we're working plumbing, we'd like that plumbing to be open as long as you can. And we can't really just drop metal left and right, right? We're looking for some way that we can change the plaque in a way that we can modify it in a way that we can get a sustainable long-term result by potentially improving that. And I think that it's undeniable that technology is stepping up, right? We've seen in the last couple of years, finally a few below the knee devices that actually get approved, as opposed to 10 years ago where everything was just failing to even meet basic FDA criteria. But now we're getting somewhere and we're starting to see a lot more. And I'll tell you, I mean, I've been a true believer of atherectomy below the knee. I wouldn't say that necessarily every single case, but on a selective way to be able to modify the plaque and then see pretty good balloon expansion. And then not only that, but prove it to the best of your abilities by intravascular ultrasound, I think has definitely improved my practice. And along the way, since we started to where we're at, we've had some pretty novel devices also come up, and I think it's worth having a discussion about that. Do you feel, John, I'll pull you in with this very basic question. Has your tibioperineal practice, let's say 10 years ago, to what your BTK practice is today, where would you see that there's been changes in your own practice?
Yeah, well, I, like each of you, could take those launch comments and now speak for 5 hours. There was
Yeah,
a lot,
go.
a lot,
We've got a whole ass hour.
a lot to unbundle there. So first of all, thank you to AngioDynamics. I think they're, have helped to support this, right? And, in large part to talk about their efforts specific to what you were saying in developing a clinical trial through the AMBITION, clinical trial and the AMBITION registry, which go into more detail to really evaluate that specific device, the Auryon laser, in treating patients with BTK disease in Rutherford 4 and 5. More globally, this is the whole idea of, what to treat in patients with, CLI, chronic lymphocytic ischemia, is topical and controversial. We all know that Best CLI, a remarkable study, demonstrated, that surgical bypass with appropriate conduit and target is preferred over endovascular therapy, but half of those interventions were femoral popliteal interventions. Whereas you look at basal 2, the majority were tibial interventions, and they had very different results. And maybe these different results were due to the anatomic construct. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a lot of things. But it becomes an important part of the general dialogue about what we're actually seeing and treating with patients with chronic lymphocytic ischemia. To answer your question, in some respects, my CTLI practice has not changed for 20 years, 25 years. And it hasn't changed in the fact that we're mostly treating BTK disease. When I think of CLI, we'll treat the inflow pursuant to something else. But certainly in patients who have a wound, we're not just treating inflow. Maybe if they have rest pain, we'll get adequate perfusion to resolve rest pain. But in the 5s and 6s, we need to get pretty much uninterrupted straight line flow as much as possible down to that wound. I always say it doesn't matter light bulb if the switch is unplugged into the wall or unplugged, turned off at the switch, you're not going to get any power, and you're not getting any healing in wounds if you don't get straight line flow. So that's unchanged. For a large degree, even though there's this, obviously epidemic of obesity, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease, it's still kind of the population I was treating 25 years ago, and we're just seeing more of it and more of it because it's epidemic. So that's where there isn't change. Where is a change in many ways is, well, first of all, there's more of these patients, definitely more scrutiny, definitely more devices. And with the availability of more devices, some of which are come and gone, it doesn't necessarily add clarity, right? And you have now many different choices that you need to make in treating a patient with CLI, whether it be strategic, access points, what your vessels you want to revascularize, how many vessels you want to revascularize, through to imaging, which was not available, which might guide decision. Obviously, intravascular ultrasound and OCT, more IVUS with us, with new platforms coming down the pike, as well as combined platforms which can potentially provide virtual histology. I look at Tricia Roy's work down where she can do preoperative planning with KISS, MRI to be largely predictive of whether lesions should be crossed. Maybe we're talking there about embolic potential, which I have an interest in. So we're gaining information, or maybe informatics, which is going to impact this and really affect the tools you use. And then the emergence of multiple tools. And when you only had one tool, it was easy to know what to do, right? Now we have 20 tools. So the algorithm becomes very individualized and much more complex, and that's new. So, the AMBITION registry, since that's kind of the hot topic, is designed to evaluate the Auryon laser. And the Auryon laser is a proprietary 355 nanometer laser. It's a solid state laser. It's not a mixed gas laser. It's pretty cool, actually. It's a box, but if you open up the box, it's got these mirrors and all kinds of things, which lead to the formation of a very, very coherent 355 nanometer wavelength. And as we may have discussed in the past, we know that biologically, that's a very favorable wavelength in terms of ablating plaque, but not damaging endothelium. It can also affect thrombus. And actually, the breakthrough by the company that developed at that time, Eximo, was not so much in recognizing the biological properties, the resonance of this wavelength, both in treating plaque, not having interference with contrast, not causing much thermal injury, but because it's delivered with a very, very short pulse width. The breakthrough is in getting a fiber that wouldn't degrade very quickly, so you can deliver this preferred energy. And I sort of digress a little bit because something you said really struck me and continues to strike me, is that we have so far to go. We're doing a terrible job. We're still treating a biological problem with mechanical solutions, right? And laser is mechanical, but the idea that this at least has resonance properties that are specifically suited for certain biology is a step in the right direction. Obviously, drug therapies, are a step in the right direction. So you're really kind of getting at the crux of the matter. And, both in the IDE study and in the Pathfinder registry, which is completed, this has been really, really exciting platform. I actually presented at Viva a couple of years ago across all vascular distributions, SFA and tibial, this apparent independence of outcomes with or without DCB after Auryon laser atherectomy. Now, you can argue the Swede PED kind of supported, this, but I would still say that for the most part, DCB trials have shown this to be beneficial and advantageous. But maybe there's something that we're biologically impacting by treating the vessel this way. It's essentially non-thermal. It's very, very specific. It's, it's largely photomechanical, much less photothermal. It's not disrupting critical hydrogen sulfide bonds. So I think, and a new concept, they're sort of discovering that it causes something called platelet, what's the exact word? Stunned platelets. This is interesting. Again, the wavelength affects the myosin actin components of platelets, so you don't get that contracted platelet, plaque and platelet aggregation at the site of intervention. And as you know, platelets secrete cytokines, which lead to cellular adhesion molecules, and PMN rolling, which then lead to various other metalloproteinase inhibitors and dedifferentiation of smooth muscle cells, which become secretory, as part of this, hypervascular, as hypertrophic cascade. So kind of maybe by chance and maybe on purpose, the physics of this particular device seem to be a little bit different. But of course, that's all well and good. It needs to be proven in the clinic, right? We need to see this. And like I said, in the trials to date, it's been really good. I mean, I kind of think of this as a acetylene torch. It looks different than, other laser atherectomies. And it gives a very defined area of vessel clearing. On average, the FDA required about a 30% luminal gain across the board, and that's about what you accomplish. You accomplish that in big vessels, small vessels, calcified, non-calcified, de novo, restenotic, So it seems to be very, very reproducible and consistent in that regard. And then, of course, it's ability to sort of have maybe changed biology. Those trials, however, were not randomized. So yeah, they look really good. They run overall 80% plus primary patency at 6 to 12 months. Definitely seem to be better for ISR compared to what was seen with the Excite ISR registry. But now they've really kind of put the money in, and we're always asking companies, right, to make the investment, not just, make the claim, but make the investment, in what their technology can do. So thus was bred the AMBITION trial, which is 2 parts, and you stop me anytime, you know.
Before we go into the trial, John, I've been using Auryon for about since kind of like I started in San Antonio and then moved to Austin. And my train of thought as far as why use this particular device is kind of multiple, but I'm wondering if I'm wrong or in your opinion, or if there's something I'm missing, because the way I think about it is, you know, about the pathophysiology. When I moved to San Antonio, it was like 99% below the knee disease, like terrible diabetes, metacalcinosis. And, with some of the studies, especially some of the studies Dr. Ferraresi has done of the pathophysiology, we know that 2/3 and 3/3 of the distal tibials have a large degree of metacalcinosis with neoanatomical hyperplasia as part of why the lumen gets ablated. So, thinking about POBA in that situation, I was like, I don't know how POBA is going to treat smooth muscle cells, below. So when I think about it logically, I'm like, okay, I need to somehow clear those. So some kind of ablative technology. The other reason I use it is because in some trials, it shows out of the mechanisms, the least amount of embolism, laser as compared to other forms of atherectomy. And then workflow is just pretty easy to use. And when you have a lot of travelers like we did during COVID, and or hospital can retain staff, it just makes everyone's life easy and efficient. Is there any particular reason that you gravitate to it, or something I'm missing?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been involved with this technology since it was an Israeli's company. It was helped to bring it here, so I'm very attached to it. I mean, I was attracted to it initially because of its ease of use, its versatility. The multiple lasers, platforms, the sizes that are available, the aspiration, which is really important. And now you can use this as thrombectomy combined with atherectomy with very specific techniques that I think we've evolved. So the ability to plug it into a regular wall. So, ability to move it around if you didn't like where it was. So all of that's what attracted me to it originally. But, as we move on our career, our focus has changed from kind of, looking at how something feels to what it kind of means, right? And I'm sort of, more and more animal. I don't want to like wax philosophical, but, that's what's really sort of grown on me, is that it seems to be impacting the vessel wall differently. And time will tell, and the trial will definitely tell. But that perhaps
Is that, John, is that something that you feel you are noticing on the acute technical success side, or are you also noticing this um, quote biological effect um, in the longitudinal care?
Yeah, I mean, well, because of different sizes, you can treat pretty much everything. You can treat calcium quite effectively. No, it's not the same as orbital atherectomy. It's not always the case where you get a wire through and this will go, even the 0.9. Although of course you use bad form techniques and get through access and you get anything across the lesion. But they made tremendous improvements in the technical performance of the device, increasing the lumen, decreasing the friction, adding lupricious coat, changing the characteristics of the kind of cutting blade of the tip. So it's definitely improved, continued to improve. But what really is just what you said. I know the data. I'm intimate with the data, if you will, and have presented it and been involved in it in so many levels. I did the micro CT study with them, which was interesting and novel, and other than shockwave, had not been done. So it's given me much more, I believe, of a fundamental look at how this laser is behaving and how it's interacting with human atheroma, and that's more exciting to me. I mean, I had my druthers. I keep thinking my next project. One of those projects would be like, how can we do vascular gene editing? How can we really change the blood vessel, right? Right? And this is not doing that, but maybe this and other technologies, or this combined with drug therapies or whatever. Now we're kind of at least migrating in a good direction.
Yeah, I just would say that because I pointed out in a way that high volume users, we notice certain things very early on. We just maybe don't have the data, right? And I mean, I could list a list of things, right? But I was talking to Lucas of how surprised I was about the skepticism around deep venous arterialization, for example. But if you've done it, you know that shit works, right? Like you've seen, because you follow these patients and you're doing, 10, 15 cases every week. You get to a point where you're like, I've done this enough to where I know that this feels better. And obviously it's important for us to be the shepherds of good data and make sure that that point gets across. But I believe very highly that there is a breed of high volume operators that could assess pretty quickly whether something's going to be good or something's going to be bullshit. And I feel that this is one of those where, and I'll be very honest, I didn't even look for this because I thought the technology was great. I looked for it because I didn't have a laser and because Lucas said I love it. That's the only reason. And it was I'll tell you later why it was a pain in the ass for me to get it, but we'll keep that one off the pot. But the reality
Yeah.
is, I actually
That's for the
freaking,
Patreon.
I love it. I love it. I actually love it. I mean, I have it. It's my go-to. I would say I've got 2 or 3 things now, and I'm using it on a very regular basis. And to the same point you're noticing is I'm actually seeing these things, which by very I'll be very honest and transparent. I did not see that with other lasers. I was actually pretty not enthusiastic about the results I would get with other lasers in the market, but this one I actually do feel that there's a change.
Yeah. Well, how we adopt the technology is a combination of haptics and heuristics, right? Haptics, how it feels, and heuristics, how it feels, right? And I think they're equally important. We tend to use things because they perform well, the haptics, but also because we get gratifying results, both immediate and in follow-up. I mean, look, nothing's 100%. So, it's sort of hit both of those bars, you know, uh, at least in my practice. And like you said, look, as a bleeding atherectomy, you probably use it in 70% of cases, certainly BTK. Yeah. Um, and I'd say now this is the device we're using in 80% of those cases, with occasional exceptions. Now, so yeah, we found it to be very, very beneficial. Obviously, the embolization is a big issue, which we don't make enough of. It's a separate conversation that we're working on solutions for that. But we can combine these tools. I mean, try to overcome each of the limitations that's inherent. This treats calcium, a major limitation. It's great in CTOs. You don't really have to worry so much if you're intraluminal or subintimal, which is a limitation. It's low embolization. You add some embolization, or aspiration device to it. And now you're kind of checking all the boxes. Add that to the results we have so far in registries, and hopefully now add data from AMBITION, which is both a registry and a randomized controlled trial, and now we get a complete picture, we hope.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about trials and below the knee trials and how this is going to add to that.
Wait,
that data.
just before we jump into that, can we just talk about a
Yeah.
couple of technical
Yeah.
tips and tricks for anybody out there that's been maybe considering the utilization, bringing in that AngioDynamic laser? What in your experience, Lucas, you go first. Like, where do you think is the sweet spot? What sizes do you like? Do you go pedal? Do you go femoral? Like, tell me a little bit just of how you use it in your algorithm, and then let's go into the study towards the end.
Yeah, my workhorse is the 1.5 catheter, unless I'm going below the ankle, and then I'll use the 0.9 if we're just talking about below the knee disease. And I usually pre-dilate because one thing which have been given feedback to the companies that the edges of the catheter are pretty sharp, so they catch. So I usually hit the pre-dilate with the 2 millimeter balloon and then go pretty slowly, go forward on, backward on, forward on, backward on, and then IVUS, and then balloon to a nominal diameter of the vessel, and usually just takes care of it. I mean, it's pretty simple, pretty efficient. mean, not a lot of time spent, and it gives you a reliability. Just like John said, some of these devices just feel very intuitive, and you kind of have a feel of a prediction of what's going to happen. When you see the lesion, when you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and the result's going to be this, and the majority of the time, it's that.
And what's unique is you do your laser pass, and now you see flow, which is not always the case, So, it's interesting. I mean, they have me doing some peer-to-peer discussions for new users. And pursuant to that, I started thinking about how I use it. And what was interesting is it's not just cross with a wire, pass the laser slowly. As a matter of fact, it's an hour-long conversation with these peer-to-peer about how you use it in a specific anatomic circumstances, what you're sort of looking for. How does the lesion feel? If there's a thrombotic component, which device to use based upon, the vessel size. When do you want to get retrograde, access? I mean, what do you do with a seat, as a step-by-step approach, which we're using a lot now, rather than getting that retrograde access to try to just use this as an integrated device. How do you use that? What's the wire compatibility? It turns out that as I discussed this, it's not a one-trick pony as you might think it is, but it's a tool which is relatively versatile, particularly across the spectrum of catheters available, that can be used in many different ways. And we're developing our own algorithms, just like you have one, Lucas, which is good as any, about how we like to use it to get best results. And, that's a little bit different. I don't remember in all my years with the, 308 laser kind of thinking it through like that. Maybe just more experience and time. But then it was just sort of guessing at a rate and fluence, right? And going, right? And that was it, especially without aspiration features, without, thrombus specificity. I think it's a little bit different. I'm sure you get the 308 users who are very happy with that. And I think they're both good tools, but we found the 355 to be very remarkable and differentiated in how we can use it and the results that we're getting.
I tested all of them, and I ultimately gravitated to the 1.7 for the SFA. They at least, obviously I'm not a physicist, but by the physics of it, it's probably the most powerful catheter they have. And then for tibial, the 0.9. That's about it. I don't necessarily have all the gamut, because I thought that was what fits the book that I needed, right? Like, here's where I feel that this really meets this need. And I love that I could do most of that from the bottom up. And by having a pedal access, I'm constantly dripping that sheath, and every time I'm pulling anything from a balloon to a catheter, that's just normal for me. Is I let that sheath at least give me a couple of squirts out, because I know from some of the work that I've done with John that you can't humanly see all the shit that's there, and you have to almost feel like there's just piles of sand in there just floating, that as long as you can maybe get them out either by suction from an antegrade position or by retrograde, just essentially letting it loose, that's what I do.
So Miguel, you're doing more primary access at the tibials
Way more,
now?
way more
Really?
now. Yeah. It
Can
was.
you give us? Can you talk about working
It
in
was
the
just a
in the
matter.
LVL?
It was. I'll tell you. It was just a
This,
matter of
yeah.
changing the site of service and getting more experience. Every major change from a professional standpoint in my life has led me to undertake um, new things that before I thought were um, not as great or not as useful, and then I come to realize that they're very useful. And one of those is pedal. Certainly not in high MAC cases with really bad wounds where I'm probably really wanting to get all the way down into the foot and do some lateral plantar artery potential plasty. But our ultrasounds are so good that I have a very comfortable understanding of what I'm going to get into. And if that's the case, then I'll probably go antegrade SFA and work my way down. But for anything that doesn't seem to have extreme pedal calcium burn, if I can get in from the bottom, I am absolutely going to try that. It makes the case faster, quicker, less complications, less closure devices. They're out the door in an hour. and that creates efficiencies. And honestly, even then, that's a selfish side. But from a patient satisfaction, these people are so much happier when you don't have to shave their groins and expose their parts, because it's not that we don't necessarily prep for that, but it's rare. I'm to the point that they only prep the ankle. They don't even prep the
Really?
groins. Oh yeah. If you get a good ultrasound and you
Really?
know what you're gonna go do, we don't even prep the groins. We're prepping the ankle, and those patients are out the door. And it's.
How often are you doing that? What would you say?
I would say that
How often are you doing primary ankle access and get it all done?
at least 50% of the time, at
Wow.
least. Yeah, I'm not gonna go and
Wow.
say like Jim Melton that says that only pedal is the only way you can do it, because that's not for me, not.
Yeah.
But I would say that a good chunk of at least half. What about you, John? What do you see all in all?
Yeah, we're still maybe only 10 or 20% primary pedal. And, maybe it's again just sort of my gut. I don't like to be occlusive downstream. I like that good final angio where you see it running out through the foot, which, and so many of our vessels, I treat patients that have single vessel runoff, just sort of, rubs you wrong. So we get a lot of pedal access. I mean, don't get me wrong. But once we cross, I put nothing more than the 3 French interdilator in there, and then, stabilize it and, bring anything across. So, and I like having both ends of the wire. I like those rendezvous. It just feels, again, maximal control. But it's all going to be personalized, how you feel about it, what the patients are. Ultrasounds are great, and mapping this. And maybe a slight difference in patient population, but you treat the worst of the worst, so it's probably similar. Yeah, I mean, it's neither right or wrong. It's a matter of what you're comfortable with and what you get good results with. And the 0.9 is great for that. When you talk about your algorithm, I'm sitting here thinking, accept and accept and accept, and like, when you have SFA, like if you get a area where it goes, easily through, now I want the 2.0 because I want to really go back and forth and not cross that distal cap until I have free return of blood up to that distal cap. So all thrombus has been cleared, when I'm down below the knee, I really am trying to get to the 1.5 because the micro CT data show the 1.5 is what most disrupted calcium and allowed restored pulsatility on micro CT. So I have that micro CT data in my head, and the 0.9 just was not as effective in that regard. So if that's important to you, then the 1.5 should be the goal.
So do you find yourself having to pre-dial a lot to get that 1.5 in?
Not a lot. I'd say
Not a lot? Okay.
maybe 10, 20%. I just did a case today, and rock hard calcium, about maybe a 5 centimeter CTO. The rest of it just crap. Occludes at the junction of DP, but the lateral tarsal was open as the outflow. An R4, so I didn't have to get everything open in the foot. And a little work to get the wire through. And I'm thinking, all right, we're gonna have to pre-dilate. And actually, I used a 1.5 on that one because I
And went through?
estimated, the vessel about 2.25 or so. And you can use the size of the vessel, essentially 1.5 times the size of the laser. That's what's allowed for. You can push it. But so it went through. The key is super, super, super slow. Kind of like Lucas was saying, this high thing is tough. So sit on those lesions, and pull back and then go again. You can get bad form. If you really need, you can use Pierce technique. So that's very, very rare, but yeah, for the most part, they downed the blade, Lucas. So they got rid of that sharp edge in the latest incarnation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they haven't sent me the new catheters. I still don't have the 1.7.
Lucas,
Yeah,
all
so-
new technology goes to the OBLs first. You should know that.
I
Come
know,
on.
I know.
We just let the academic places have it about 3 years after we've proven it works. Okay.
That's true. I went to the hospital at one
It's
point
true.
complaining, that we didn't have enough stuff. They said, well, just tell us what you use in your OBL, thinking we'd have less than the OBL, right? I gave them the list. I'm like, yeah, we can't reproduce that.
Oh, I have cases
Yeah.
in the hospital that I'll tell the patient, yeah, your case is too complicated. You have to go to the OBL. I can't do it here. I swear I've said that at least once in the last 3 years.
You said with a huge smile on your
Huge.
face.
We'll get you over to the
huge.
doctor, Lucas. We'll get you there.
Oh, he's getting there. He's getting there.
Yeah.
He's going Bad Bunny on us. So,
Yeah, exactly.
So ambition.
all right.
All right,
So
cool.
registry.
So ambition,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's talk about registry.
So, so the PIs for the trial are going to be, let me pull this up here. I think I know that anyway, but to make sure I get it right. So Dr. Anahita Duo, as you know, she's fabulous. She is at Mass General. And the other PI on the trial is, remind me again. So I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. I'll find it in a second. And it's going to be about 30 sites. In the randomized trial, there's going to be 224 patients. And then there's up to 1,500 patients that are allowed in the registry. So the randomized is going to be randomizing, obviously, against POBA, which is the current standard of care. And in the registry, which is really nice, like I said, you can treat everything. So it's not the ending you're doing Aaron Armstrong, of course, I can forget that. So, so they're the PIs. And registry, you can treat all those, those lesion morphologies and clinical patients that you would otherwise not have included in clinical trials. I'm really excited about the registry. Like I said, I've been telling companies for decades that we need to include those patients in some form or fashion in a study. You need to benchmark the data for future analyses.
I don't think we've been approved. I think that we did the SIV. The initial application. So make sure that you use your own contacts and push it forward so that we can help at Hope.
So we're up and running. The trial is up and running, which is great, very exciting. Should go quick, I would think. It's
I think it will.
Yeah. We're seeing between 6 and 10 of those a week now. So it's like, right. You may be seeing more.
What about this trial is going to change the argument that there's no great data for atherectomy below the knee?
Yeah. Well, look, I think there's been a lot of appropriate discussion about atherectomy. Part of that problem is that it includes atherectomy as a single device when you say atherectomy, when clearly it's 10 different devices with different mechanisms of action and different indications for use. So it'll help to clarify how this specific device, which we think is in some ways best in class for atherectomy, performs both in real-world population as well as in a population with chronic limb-threatening ischemia and predominantly infrapopliteal disease, which we think is most relevant compared to POBA, which arguably, many people and much of the surgical community, you can talk about this, Miguel, feel should be the predominant standard of care, especially when, people tend to shy away from atherectomy. So it's appropriate in that regard as using POBA as the reference standard. I think it'll give some data which hopefully be irrefutable to all operators, about how these technologies compare in that population with BTK disease. And again, R4, R5. And again, it's going to give us a whole new body of knowledge about how it performs in a real world population of individuals who have really, really complex pattern disease, whether it be long CTOs and or, heel wounds or dialysis, patients, all these things that we've shied away from. So I think it's going to considerably add to our understanding of atherectomy and our understanding of just a general treatment of patients with, BTK CTLI.
So this study is already off to the races? There's already active enrollment, or is it about to start?
I believe there have been a few early cases enrolled, yeah. And you've seen this in some of the PE trials. So the problem with a single endpoint or the composite endpoint is that everything gets dichotomized, right? It either happens or it doesn't happen, depending upon whether all components of the composite ratio or the composite endpoint occur, or each one individually. And in that regard, it fails in two important ways. One is it doesn't give any necessarily give any sense of importance of those endpoints. Now, we can all say what we think the most important endpoint is, but the idea of the wound ratio is that it now gets it creates hierarchical endpoints, each of which will be evaluated individually, but more importantly, now allows us to get in essence a composite score of each of these without a win or lose because any one of multiple components fails. So if you had a composite endpoint, occurrence of A, B, or C, if any of those happened, it's a fail. It's a zero, right? Right. So by doing this, now you can look at each one individually, and it's hierarchical. So obviously, major amputation is the number one thing, right? Then they have TLR, TLR we can, sort of, argue about because to me, TLR is perhaps a surrogate of subsequent events, perhaps not. All right. And then, of course, there's, reintervention. Reintervention for patients is a noxious event. And we know that, if you go Japanese registries, 40% reintervention rate in this population, probably more currently, it's about 25%. So it's a win ratio. Each of these things are looked in a hierarchical order, and you can interpret the data by the occurrence of each event and the overall win. That is, you win 2 out of 3, you win 1 out of 3. What is that ratio? How often are you winning in these patients amongst the elements of the composite compared to clumping them all together? So that's the idea behind a win ratio, and obviously a statistical methodology behind that you need to be a statistician to understand. But it provides a very, very different perspective on outcomes, which I find just intuitively to make sense. I mean, I want to know how each of these components performs, but I also want to know overall, are we winning? Are we overall providing more good than bad with regard to all the measurable outcomes that can be attributed to an intervention? And that's what this is designed to do.
If they're gathering intravascular ultrasound imaging as part of the study?
They'll collect it, but it's not required. They'll collect it.
Okay.
Required.
Mm.
Well, I expect that to be probably churning some information. To your point, I think that one's going to be quick because it's sometimes there's what I call the unicorn studies and the non-unicorn studies, right? Unicorn studies, you're out there, you're thinking of them, and out of 100 you find one. But this is a non-unicorn study. I feel like it's flexible enough to where it's going to give us some real cases, and it's going to let us enroll pretty quickly. And yeah, I mean, I would think that within 15 months we're going to hear something. What do
On
you
the
think?
registry, Miguel, it's every patient other than the patients you're putting in other studies. Right?
Yeah.
Anyone who's having
Yeah.
isolated BTK work, so it's every patient. So
What are you going to look for in the randomized control trial versus the registry as far as information and how to interpret it? Like it is, yeah. As a clinician, as somebody that applies this every day.
so obviously they're kind of different questions, right? So for the registry, you're going to get performance in a real world population, including lesions that to a large degree are not included in most randomized trials. Actually, not included in most single arm trials. So we're going to glean information that just currently is not really available. It just is not available. The populations I talked about. In the randomized is going to be more specific to answer that nagging question, which still prevails about whether POBA is sufficient or whether atherectomy with this particular device and its biological behavior combined with atherectomy really makes a difference and is safe. So, and that's, the big question. I think that remains the debate. I was at Viva last year, had an opportunity to debate Caitlin Hicks, and, I got to say, I went in there thinking she's going to beat me up, but, she had a lot of great points. And I think that, I, kind of had a lot of great points, and there is value to this discussion and value to this controversy. And a trial will really take a big step forward in answering that specific question. Caitlin will have you believe that BTK disease is treated with balloon angioplasty, right? And you can't argue that's the standard. It's been the standard I've been practicing for 35 years now. This now is the latest and greatest, newest technology with a very good safety profile. Lots of preliminary data from Nick Shamasa's data and from the other registries showing good clinical outcomes along with the safety profile. A great platform to use along with angioplasty compared to the current reference standard of POBA.
Can you give us a sample of what that argument is, that BTK disease is just treated with POBA, and then can you stillman it, in your own words? Can you give us a little taste of what that discussion was?
Yeah, well, those who say that, it's really not so much POBA alone, it's more that atherectomy adds risk. They will cite, data, administrative data sets, which show a higher rate of reintervention and a higher rate of major amputation in patients who undergo atherectomy in addition to angioplasty. On the other hand, as we all know, including Eric Sosempsky's recent analysis, there's a lot of data from administrative data sets, that show just the opposite. The people who don't believe in atherectomy say that the use of atherectomy is driven by financial incentive and the increased utilization of OBLs and ASCs. There's additional data that says, yeah, that's maybe true. We're using more atherectomy in OBLs and ASCs, but we're also getting lower amputation rates than historically seen. So, like a lot of data at this point, it just remains unclear and not necessarily definitive, in my opinion. And the only way to further get a definitive solution is have a trial that is representative of all people on both sides of the argument. I have a lot of respect for Anita. I mean, this is a big undertaking for her. I mean, if you think about it, the surgical community has been largely questioned the value of atherectomy. Not everybody, but amongst all the people who treat, chronic limb-threatening ischemia, it's probably fair to say the surgical community has been kind of most concerned about that outcome. And she's a surgeon. She's put herself in a position where she's willing to sort of tackle this,
I think Anita is audacious enough to say, data speaks and let's just figure it out, right? I mean, it's not, we're not fighting each other. We're just fighting for the truth. That's it. And so having a hierarchy of composite freedom where it's major amputation, clinically driven, like CDTLR, and then primary patency, I think I'm super excited. And I think, I have my own biases. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. But I think it's going to be a very interesting study. And TBD.
Despite the reticence of much of the surgical community, and you have her, she's headstrong and outspoken. You have Aaron, who's much more kind of conservative. It's a great balance, really. Yeah.
I think so. And then Aaron's got huge experience. How many freaking papers has Aaron put out there? A big believer on endo. And so this is an interesting dupla, to say the least. But we'll have to have you on the show later on when all those results tally and we can talk to our audience about some of these exciting findings.
That'll be great. And it's always so good to talk to you guys. I mean, what you've done is remarkable. You continue to lead the way. I have such admiration, as you know, for everything you've done. Lucas, I haven't known you as long. Miguel, I've known you for longer, and I consider you a friend and in many respects a mentor. And if everybody could be more like you guys, we'd have a much better world. So
I'm not sure about
that. But hey, I'll take it.
But I'll take.
On that note, we close out the podcast.
I love you, John. Thank you. Thank you very much.